Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to you for this launch event of the European Democracy Hub, a joint initiative of the European Partnership for Democracy and Carnegie Europe. My name is Ken Godfrey. I'm the Executive Director of the European Partnership for Democracy. I'm very delighted to be joined here today for the first half of our event by European Commissioner for International Partnerships, Jutta Urpilainen. Good morning to you, Commissioner. Before handing over the floor to the Commissioner for the Keynote Address, just give a short introduction to the European Democracy Hub, which emanates from cooperation between EPD and Carnegie Europe in recent years. And that cooperation made us very acutely aware of the depth and quality, sort of the improvements in the depth and quality of research on democracy itself. And this has meant that there is a sort of vast, rich spectrum these days of facts, figures, and analysis of democracy itself. And this includes, of course, in the last year, sort of wealth of information on the impact of the coronavirus on democracy, including looking at democracy globally, but also the impact on parliaments or on freedom of expression. At the same time, we're also aware that there are over a number of years, perhaps a few decades, there's also a wealth of expertise that's encapsulated in evaluations of projects and programs, as well as rich human experience of supporting democracy around the world. And what we felt on the basis of our cooperation was that the middle area in between academic analysis of democracy itself and practical experience was comparatively understudied and deserved greater attention. So we sort of committed to looking at different themes that we think are important, such as the importance or how to work in supporting democracy in states which have dominant party systems, or looking at particular countries, for example, the coup in Myanmar yesterday and what that might mean for democracy supporters, or the election in Uganda last month. And so we've committed to bring together a group of prominent academics and prominent practitioners and policymakers in order to create this permanent hub to contribute to common efforts to improve the relevance, the impact, and the learning of European efforts to support democracy around the world. And we hope that this will contribute to sort of improving the efficiency and effectiveness of those joint efforts. Now, the two of those prominent academics will be joining us later in the discussion for a conversation with Richard Youngs, who's a senior fellow at Carnegie. They are Julia Leininger, who is the chair of the research program Transformation of Political Disorder at the German Development Institute, and Staffan Lindberg, who is the director of the Varieties of Democracy Institute. Now, if you want more information on the European Democracy Hub, you are please have a look at the link to our website. And for any tweeting during this event, please use the hashtag European Democracy Hub. So that's it from me in terms of an introduction. We're here to talk about the links between development and democracy in light of the launch of the hub. So without further ado, I hand over the floor or the screen to you, Commissioner, for the keynote address.
Thank you very much for this invitation. Dear friends, I want to thank the Carnegie Europe and also the European Partnership for Democracy, because first of all, I think this initiative to launch this hub is excellent. And of course, I'm very honored to address you today and be part of this launching event. In the narrow corridor to liberty, authors Acemoglu and Robinson argued that both state and society must be strong for liberty to flourish. There are two extremes: the fear and repression of despotic states on the one end, and the violence and lawlessness that emerge in their absence on the other end. But in between lies a narrow corridor to liberty, in which state and society balance each other out. And we must invest in this narrow corridor. We must invest in functioning states and resilient societies. The impact of COVID-19 on democracy has shown us why this is so important. All over the world, non-democratic regimes have used the opportunity to violate human rights and democracy, centralize power, and silence the opposition. We have witnessed the censoring of media, making parliaments weaker and curbing political opponents. Women and young people, in particular, are paying the highest price. And this cannot be. The EU will continue to ensure that our global recovery is fair, inclusive, sustainable, and respects fundamental values. With our new action plan on human rights and democracy and a new financial instrument, we will work with partners around the world. We want to help deliver real democracy, quick and flexibly, prioritizing impact over form. We want to deliver a real choice, a real voice to those who need it more than ever. So the European Commission is also preparing a communication on a renewed multilateralism that I will present together with the High Representative Vice President Borrell to the College in the coming weeks. We want multilateralism to deliver rules and standards. And for this, we must build an alliance of democracies with like-minded countries. But of course, with the support of all partners, including you. So I have to say that I very much welcome your efforts to really come together to create a permanent hub for expertise on democracy support. The starting point for our work on democracy is having evidence-based information from trusted sources. And of course, with its twin focus on research and network building, the European Democracy Hub is exactly that, as we heard in the beginning of this event. So with your informed opinions, we understand, hopefully better, the state of democracy, and so we can address the challenges and take forward also the opportunities. So friends, I think what we have learned during the past few years, but also the past few weeks, I would say, we can never take democracy for granted. Instead, let's promote it together. And I think this will be my main message today. Let's promote it together. And I'm very much looking forward to your question and our conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I actually just finished reading that book. It's quite a big book, the Narrow Corridor, but very interesting. I mean, they do make a very persuasive argument that investments in society are equally important to investments in the state, which is something that maybe has been received less attention in the development community in recent years. I wondered maybe if we look a bit towards the future, we, in the context of the hub, we've already released some articles. They've looked at the human rights sanctions mechanism, the new human rights sanction mechanism of the EU. Also looked at authoritarian aid in the context of the conflict in Ethiopia, what is happening in Armenia as a result of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. We'll have a piece coming out on Belarus, and there's also a recent piece about the right to protest of Europeans, so within the European Union. And it really has brought to light to us the sort of the importance accorded by citizens as well as politicians of democracy. So I wondered, in that context, what role do you see for the European Union, for EU institutions in supporting democracy around the world? Commissioner, you're muted, I believe.
Sorry, sorry, here I am. So I just wanted to comment very briefly on that book, because you were referring to that as well. I have only read part of that because, as you said, it's huge, but I found it very, very interesting, and I can also recommend that to everyone. I think you should really read that, because I think it gives you a different kind of perspective, but also very, very useful information of the state of democracy and the world. I would say that in the world of democratic backsliding, there is definitely a need for leadership to defend democracy. And of course, the current Commission has taken up the challenge. Our commitment is reflected in the International Action Plan on Human Rights and Democracy, as well as in the internal European Democracy Action Plan. So we have actually published recently 2 different papers on democracy. A new financial instrument, NDICI, on which I have been negotiating with the European Parliament, but also with the European Council. This new instrument will also reflect the EU's role to lead on international democracy support. And the program replacing AIDHR, the program, will have an enhanced budget of 1.5 billion euros. So I think, of course, there is a huge need for that, but I would say that it's quite a sizable amount of funding. Of course, programming has also started, and acting together with our member states as Team Europe, we are now collecting Team Europe initiatives. And I can tell you that Team Europe initiatives on democracy support are already under preparation in several countries. For instance, in Gambia, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Angola. And this is a new way of working, that together the member states, but also the European Commission and the financial institutions are working as a team at the country level. And I'm very happy that we also have, as I described, initiatives on democracy support. And I think it was important what you said in the beginning, and what was also the message of the book, that democracy is not only about elections, but it is also about participation and empowerment of citizens. And I, as a former national politician and a current commissioner, I also understand that in order to really have a democratic society, people, they have to have that feeling that they are able to influence, they are able to be part of that society, and also to be empowered. So I would say that according to our new gender action plan, empowering of women is of course crucial. And another important aspect is of course empowering of young people. And last week, I actually launched a youth sounding board, which will engage especially young people in discussing international partnerships. So I really hope that this is a one tool to engage with young people. So I would say that these are some ideas where I see that that EU could definitely take even a stronger role in defending democracy.
You mentioned the I saw the initiative on Twitter. You mentioned the action plan, so both of the action plans, but you've also mentioned the programming, which I understand is underway at the moment. So delegations, as well as in Brussels, are discussing various different priorities. You've mentioned the sort of the challenges to democracy. So I wondered, in that context, if there are any sort of specific challenges or opportunities on the hand that the EU will be paying particular attention to in the coming years?
Well, I would say, firstly, that of course we all understand that democracy promotion is an integral part of post-COVID recovery. Because we know that unfortunately in many societies the COVID has make a very negative impact also on democracy, and also civil society and media. Not only democracy, but also I would say all the different elements of democracy, like free media and also civil society. But at the same time, we need efficient and also accountable institution to fight the virus. So I think this the role of the institutions is also relevant. And I think that if we only look at the current discussion on vaccines, we understand that we really need accountable and also efficient institutions. Secondly, I would say that we all recognize the challenges to democratic development have also a geopolitical dimension. So there is a link between the geopolitics and also the democracy. And of course, there are important actors which are openly promoting more authoritarian model of society and also a governance. I see that, I would say, almost every day, having discussions with my African partners, that in Africa there is a huge competition between the different model of societies and also the different model of governance. And I think that's why a cooperation of like-minded countries is so important, that we really need to work as an alliance. So I personally believe there is a renewed momentum for multilateral cooperation to sustain democracy. And that's, of course, the one reason why we are publishing this new communication on multilateralism in the coming weeks, and I really looking forward also the discussion of it afterwards.
Yeah, it's I think a topic that's somehow in vogue, considering the election of Joe Biden as president of the United States, and there's been a call for a sort of global summit of democracies, and actually Carnegie Europe released something last week, a set of articles looking at what the EU could do in cooperation with the US administration, and our very own Richard Youngs had an article within that looking at the protection of democracy beyond in the post-transatlantic era. Mm-hmm. I wondered about you've mentioned a few times that cooperation with like-minded democracies. And I wonder if there's something that you think, is there a role for democracy supporters in that cooperation of like-minded partners? What role would you see for initiatives like the Hub or other organizations supporting democracy around the world in this enhanced cooperation?
Yes, definitely. We are ready. We are ready to explore new partnerships to promote democracy. And as you said, this new transatlantic relations offer definitely us a new prospect. And we have already announced that the EU is ready to engage with the Biden administration, and also on the possible global summit of democracy, as you were referring to. But I have to also underline that it's not only about the transatlantic leadership, but there is a broader support for democracy. I give you some example. I have been involved in preparing the EU strategy on Africa recently, as well as also in negotiating on a new post-Cotonou agreement with African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. And even though, we had very tough negotiations with African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries, I can assure you, and I'm confident, that, for example, those ACP countries are also very important partners for the EU on promoting democratic governance. So it's not only the transatlantic, which is, of course, an important and huge opportunity, but I would say that it's much more broader, and definitely we are looking for different partners. Like also, I would say that we would like to engage with the United Nations, the IMF, and the World Bank, and of course another international banks and actors to promote transparency and democracy together at the country level on the ground. So definitely, in the spirit of inclusive multilateralism, I hope that also you, democracy supporters, will play a role in developing ideas for the new multilateral approaches and to sustain democracy. And of course, we hope that we find also processes where the civil society and other stakeholders truly count. For instance, I just give you an example that I instructed all our EU delegations to really consult the civil society now when we are preparing our programming, because I also think that from the democratic perspective, they might have that kind of a piece of information and knowledge that we otherwise don't get from the national governments or parliamentarians or so forth. So I think also at the country level, it's very important to engage with the civil society and also democratic supporters. So looking forward to working together.
And I think the point that you're making there it chimes very well with the narrow corridor. I think that's sort of the important role that society plays, that different individuals with society, organized groups, or citizens themselves. And I wondered maybe if you had a reflection on the fact that, so for the EU, most of the cooperation happens with the state. This is the normal, natural partner. And that I think, that will remain. But in certain instances, it's difficult. There can be potentially conflict between that support to the state and other values like human rights or democracy or rule of law. So I wondered, in the context of something like budget support or direct support to a government, whether there are openings for greater cooperation or greater oversight of that by including other actors within that support in order to ensure that something like budget support is more effective in its support for democracy, human rights, and rule of law.
Well, you have to remember that always when we use that modality as budget support, there are very strict conditionality relating to that. So we don't really, we have conditions, we have a conditionality, we follow, we monitor the progress. And then, of course, like in the case of Ethiopia, we didn't make disbursement to Ethiopian government because of the recent development in that state. So I think it's also always important to remember that there is a very strong conditionality. We are using European citizens' money, and also from that perspective, I think it's important that there is this kind of a legitimacy, that there is a reason why we are using that money and what do we also achieve with that money. And we need to be able to, in the name of the transparency, tell that to the citizens. But I think, like you said, of course, we have been mainly working together with the governments, and I think that's national. I think that's quite rational because, of course, they are responsible for their citizens. They are elected, hopefully, by the people through elections. But I think, and this is also my experience as a politician, I think it's also very important to hear those weak voices of society, that you don't only focus on those who have power, and you are in the who are in the government or who are the civil servants of that state. I think it's important also to hear, of course, the voice of opposition, but also the civil society, who very often represent those most vulnerable people. So those people who otherwise don't have voice in the society. So I think that's our duty as the European decision makers and also as a commission, to have that kind of a variety of the voices and also the information of society. And this is definitely something I'm pushing forward also through that consultation process I have now instructed our delegations to organize, but also by listening young people, because if you only look at the demographic of Africa, where 60% of the citizens are under 25 years old, if we don't give any participation opportunity and for them, so of course, how can we say that democracy really happens and is part of that society? So I think also from that perspective, really engaging with young people, giving their different kind of tools and measures to participate, engage, and be part of the society is a high priority to me. But thank you very much for this opportunity. I think I find it very interesting, and I definitely will follow the hub and all the work you are doing.
Very good. Thank you very much, Commissioner. And we'll be there to help support and also try to provide a useful input. I know there are many issues that you've mentioned that I would have liked to get into, such as the importance of gender. You mentioned it a number of different times, and I think that there's a strong case for more support to women in political parties, for example. That's something I know that is close to your heart, and we very much look forward to working with you in the future. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
I will now hand over the screen to Richard Youngs, who will lead the conversation for the second half of the event. Richard.
Thanks to Ken and to the Commissioner. Good morning to everyone. Yeah, my name is Richard Youngs. I work in Carnegie Europe. I'm partnering with Ken and his colleagues on the European Democracy Hub. We thought, as we have a good audience online, we'd just have half an hour debate to follow up from the Commissioner. As Ken said, we're joined by Julia Leininger and Staffan Lindberg, two stars of the democracy field. Interestingly, two analysts who have gathered some quite interesting empirical information in recent years. So we wanted to focus in on some of the considerations that this information brings to the policy debate. So perhaps start with you, Staffan. Academics have been debating the relationship between democracy and development for decades, and often reach contrasting conclusions on that relationship. What does your data, the VDEM data, tell us about how that relationship has evolved in very recent years?
Look, I think the first thing to notice is that the data shows very clearly now across all types of indicators, as we know, a steep decline for democracy in the world. And our data shows that 2019 was a particularly bad year, even in the light of the last sort of 10 years of decline. And 2.6 billion people now live in countries undergoing autocratization in one form or the other. We have lost 36 democracies since the mid-1990s. And this trend now also involves a number of G20 countries, large important countries for the world, such as India, Brazil, Ukraine, of course, United States, and Turkey that ceased to be a democracy some 4 or 5 years ago. And the commissioner obviously was concerned with international partnerships and talk about the rest of the world a lot, but it also includes countries in the European Union, as we know, Poland and Hungary, that according to our measures have ceased to be a democracy. It's an electoral autocracy these days. There is also a large body of research in various fields. I'm not only talking about political science here, that speaks to the dividends of democracy. We're working on a large project. We'll present this also in March, 22nd to 25th of March, in a democracy week co-organized with the European Commission. But there's a very clear dividend of democracy for growth, and especially pro-poor growth. And the evidence is becoming clearer and clearer and clearer. Asimov and Robinson are two authors that have contributed to this, but there are many others. Democracy is better at human health. We have an increasing number of studies from, published in places like the Lancet and BMG and so on, showing, and part of my team have also produced a study showing that, things like infant mortality goes down when countries democratize. Life expectancy is better and becomes better with increasing levels of democracy. Autocratization leads to a worse performance on a number of healthy indicators. We have the old knowledge about the democratic peace. Democracies don't fight wars with each other. Wars are terrible for human development in any sense of the term, but also in internal civic conflict and security, not the least for women and children, that the commissioner also spoke about, and gender equality. Democracies are better at producing enabling social infrastructures that I know Julia has been working on in terms of social cohesion and trust. And also now we see with the emerging climate change discussion that democracies are better at committing to climate change targets, better at enacting strong environmental protection policies and implementing them. And finally, with the COVID-19, of course, which is a big issue, there is nothing to suggest in the current evidence, and now there are hundreds, if not thousands of studies, nothing to suggest that democracies are worse or less, as the Commission talked about, less efficient and accountable for implementation and protecting their people from COVID-19. A lot of autocracies and countries autocratizing are terrible at this, right? And fighting the pandemic. And democracies on average are doing pretty decent. So I think we have to be able to both defend democracy based on its intrinsic values that are associated with human rights, but also be part of building this narrative for democracy in terms of its dividends in a number of areas that also are covered by the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Let's turn to Julia and get her reactions. I guess if I paraphrase Staffan, he's saying that the information tells us that life has got a lot more difficult for democracy supporters. Supporting democracy effectively has become a much more onerous enterprise, but that it's still worth trying to do in terms of its development dividends. The Commissioner told us a number of ways in which the EU has learned lessons and begun to fine-tune its approach to governance support. Just wondered, you lead a big program that's collected data on democracy and governance support around the world. How do you think the democracy support agenda has evolved over the last decade in response to some of the trends that Staffan is laying on the table?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Well, I think the most important thing for the agenda of democracy support that was also stressed by the commissioner is that democracy is back on the geostrategic agenda. And I think it's important to be aware how it got there again. So we shifted, and I wouldn't talk about a decade only, but about 30 years. So we shifted from a bipolar to a multipolar world, which is crucial for democracy support. So we had this spirit of the free world in the 90s. That was the height of democracy support when the so-called democracy promotion industry emerged, and good governance became an established kind of precondition for development programs, and both democracy and good governance were priorities on the foreign policy and on the development policy agendas. But there was a decline, and if we think of Staffan's observations as a wave like of democratization with transitions and then going back to more autocratic regimes and stalled democratic transitions, etc., one can this is kind of mirrored on the democracy promotion agenda, because beginning of the 2000s, around 2005, we can observe a decline, not in numbers, but in a more technical assistance. And priorities shifted more to economic policies, private sector support, etc. And also on the global level, economic competition between global powers was back on the agenda. And there's, in my view, a crucial moment that is often overlooked, and that's 2015, when the SDG agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030, was negotiated. And that was the moment where SDG 16, the goal on governance and peace and democracy, well, maybe not democracy, but governance and peace, almost dropped off the agenda because the global powers like China and others couldn't agree on that goal. It made it into the agenda because they could agree on specific terms and notions like inclusive governance, accountability, and transparency. And I think this is one of the moments where democracy came back on the agenda, and this political, first of all, a political divide, which has grown into a political competition on a global scale today, emerged or re-emerged. So now we are in a world where global powers offer, as the commissioner said, different political models that stand for either stability or instability, stability often linked to autocracy, instability to democracy. But we know that the picture is more complex. And let me just say, because I started off with the bipolar world and the multipolar world, I think there are three issues that are really important. So the first one is that the multipolar world is constituted of states and non-state actors. Non-state actors and transnational relations are important for democracy support, but that is a challenge for those supporting democracy, because organizations like the EU cooperate with states, and it's more difficult to cooperate with non-state actors for a state organization. So that there need to be new ways to cooperate. The second point, which is different from the bipolar world in this multipolar world now, is that polarization is not only between states, but we do observe a lot of polarization within states, and that has implications for democracy support. And the last point that was also raised by the commissioner is that the pandemic showed us that global cooperation is really necessary, and not only with regard to economic issues, but especially with regard to social issues and issues like social cohesion, trust in institutions.
So in a way, the democracy support community has had to adjust to quite profound geopolitical change and domestic change as well. Just staying with you, Julia, for a minute. I guess the skeptic might listen to you and Staffan together and say, look, the trends are so difficult. The headwinds against democracy are so strong now. The changes to the international system are so negative or so problematic for democracy support. Can this kind of support actually work today? Is it not better for an actor like the EU to focus on supporting economic development in the hope that that kind of economic modernization can bring democracy and governance improvements in its wake? You've been charting democracy programs around the world in a large number of countries. I wonder how you would respond to that, and what can we learn from the way that democracy supporters have tried to adjust to these trends? Is it still an enterprise that's worth attempting?
Mm. So the very simple good news is, yes, it can work, and it often works. In that geostrategic context, it is important to stand up for values. So the answer to your question whether economic policies only is definitely no, because this is a matter of human dignity as well. Let me say one thing with regard to evidence on whether democracy support works or not. So first of all, there is a need of transparency, we need data, etc. But we should be aware that there is a limit to transparency in democracy aid, because the agenda now turns to more impact measurement, etc., which I think is a very good and needed thing. But at the same time, democracy support is a kind of policy that can endanger individuals and groups. Supporting somebody who opposes an autocrat is at risk, right? So there needs to be negotiations on opening an autocratic regime might be dangerous for some. So there is a need to a certain intransparency, although we don't like it. And for us as academics, researchers, it's not a very good thing, but it should be there. So what do we know? We know that democracy support and democracy protection can be effective. It is, when looking at different countries and comparing countries, like from a cross-national perspective, we know that democracy support and aid works best where there has a certain opening going on. Countries that are democratizing are in a, let's say, democratization flow. This also speaks to the common sense that no external actor will ever make a systemic change, in a sense that without that actor there wouldn't be a democracy, right? So there's always a limit. So the only thing an external actor can do is to support and contribute to a process that is already ongoing. And when we now look at the project level, because in development, sometimes also foreign policy, it's project level. We have a lot of evidence that on local levels, projects to support participation, like participatory budget processes, etc., twinning programs work well. But then when it comes to translating that local success into a systemic change, that is very difficult, and the mechanisms are not clear, and it seems that it hasn't worked so far because of states capture coming from the national level. And one last point that speaks to what Staffan said on autocratization processes that are more gradual. We do know that democracy aid helps in situations where presidents attempt to increase their term limits or extend their term limits. There it helps if external actors come in and support civil society organizations, not only in the event, but a long time before. And there would be much more evidence, but let me leave it at that.
No, but I think that's a good nuanced overview, that it's plausible to argue that these programs do have a positive impact, even if we can't pin down specific kind of causal outcomes directly resulting from individual programs. Staffan, you've been reflecting on similar issues to Julia and collecting data, not just on domestic trends in democratic quality, but also in aid figures and the correlation between aid and development outcomes, governance outcomes. So I wonder what your view is on this question of whether, even if we agree that in principle there is some kind of positive linkage between democratic quality and development outcomes, is that a relationship that through external action we can help engineer in any tangible, concrete sense?
Thank you, Richard. I think the emerging evidence is pretty clear. There was a recent, very thorough and comprehensive study made by people from the UN wider, and showing that of positive effects of democracy support, but it was focusing on Swedish democracy support, but also to assess sort of the larger international community and OECD-DAC countries. And at least that it doesn't have any detrimental effects, but on average positive effects. And then sort of tagging on to what Julia talked about with the changing geopolitical situation, I don't think we have a choice. The commissioner sort of implied this, but democracy now has explicit enemies in the world. And they are working strategically and have been working strategically, some for over 30 years, to undermine democracy, human rights, systematically in the world. And this includes our own countries in Europe. And we know who they are. Some of the big players, of course, are Russia and China and Saudi Arabia, and increasingly Turkey. And we have to face this. And therefore, I think there are all these calls. Biden has called for a summit. The commissioner talked about creating an alliance of like-minded countries. The German foreign minister, good, back on the democracy arena, wants the Marshall Plan for democracy. Sweden has its drive for democracy, good, because I think we have to get used to that. It's not only democracy support we're talking about, but to use what at least I heard for the first time from Julia herself in a seminar with GIZ, we need democracy protection, both at home and globally. And here I think as the academic community, we have to sort of do our part with conducting the type of analytical work that they ask for now, evidence-based policy making, and that's a big challenge. We're trying to meet it. Julia and her team at DIE and many others, where I think we have an important role to fill, and we should recognize here, I think also that despite these geopolitical contexts, there's also a lot of evidence of the global support for democracy, not only in civil society and NGOs, but people. 44% of countries in the world had pro-democratic protests in 2019 only. 44% of the countries. Right? Both in autocracies, we saw Sudan, where the regime fell, but also in democracies like Chile, where they want more and better democracy. So it's not only about alliance of like-minded partners, but also drawing on and recognizing that there's a broad swath of humanity out there, of the population of the world, who wants dignity, as Julia talked about, who wants human rights, and who wants to be included, have inclusive governance. And there is no inclusive governance without democratic principles observed.
I wonder if just in the last part of our debate, we can perhaps move down from these overarching trends and consider what the implications of these are for concrete policy decisions that the Commissioner and others have to take. In particular, I'm intrigued by the concept of democracy protection that both of you have been writing about and advocating. I wonder what, if you had to boil that down into a kind of policy lesson or policy suggestion for the Commissioner what it would be in terms of where the EU should be focusing its resources. I wonder if the implication is that more resources need to go into protecting, upholding democracy where it already has a foothold, rather than countries that some argue might be on the verge of undertaking some process of political change. The Commissioner mentioned a number of countries where the Commission is beginning to focus more, where Team Europe is beginning to join together the dots of its development and governance work. I wonder if you had to kind of operationalize this concept of democracy protection, what it would mean in terms of country priorities. Staffan.
Oh, I think Julia should go first. She's the originator of the term.
Okay, Julia.
I think I'm still muted. Okay. So I give you some time to think, Staffan, on that one. Yeah, let me come back to the, although it might be too broad because you asked me to narrow it down, but let me start there and then I narrow it down. I think what the commissioner said at the end, that there will be what did she call it, an action plan on multilateralism has huge implications for democracy support on the ground as well. And why I'm saying this because of this idea of more transnational relations in the world. Staffan, you called that there are a lot of people out there defending democracy, and there are a lot of allies one can find beyond the state. And this is a game changer for multilateralism. And this has implications then for the approaches taken by the EU and other actors. And I see two implications at least. The first one is that there is a need for more integrated and multi-directional approaches. So when I say multi-directional, when it comes to protecting democracy, it is about joining what I think in the action plan for democracy, what the EU also highlights in the action plan, namely learning from own experience, communicating and being in a dialogue with others, and being open to learn from other countries. So multi-directional means it's not the West teaching the rest, it's the West also listening and Europe listening to similar problems that have emerged in the global South. So I'm a bit hesitant to talk about paradigm shifts because there were many calls for paradigm shifts in cooperation with Africa and development cooperation, etc. But I am convinced that there is a need of change of cooperation here, in a sense that there need to be formats that allow the European Union and others to listen more. And this has a lot to do with accountability at home, right? Being accountable means being accountable to European citizens, but at the same time being open to learn from other people around the world and experience in other places requires that to be open to policy shifts as well and bring in these different people. And when I say integrated approaches, so what the pandemic showed, and also the experience that we have either or agendas, either economic policies or democracy or social, they have to be integrated. We saw in the pandemic now that people need to be able to trust state institutions. That's more likely in society, in democratic societies. We see that in Senegal, for instance. But it's not only about democracy, it's about democracy and maybe social protection to mitigate polarization and increase social cohesion, for instance. We have several studies showing that. And this for the European Union means to bring together the different agendas that are on the table at the moment.
So linking policies together and listening to voices in other countries. I'm sure many of our policymakers would would share those sentiments.
Sorry,
Of course,
Richard, to interrupt you, but it's not only about listening, it's also about taking it serious and then making change based on that, right? Sorry.
My question was going to be, in turn to Staffan, I guess, was the difficulty of working out what those kind of broad sentiments mean in terms of concrete decisions. I guess just to make it very, very topical, what would your recommendations be in response to what's happening in Myanmar at the moment? This is a clear case where the logic of democracy protection would seem to be very much on the agenda, a country where the EU has invested a lot in development work in a way that links together the development agenda with what was a very, very fragile and incipient process of political change that now clearly is in danger. And if we listen to the voices coming out of Myanmar, some Burmese voices are saying it's time to break relations completely. Others are saying the EU still needs to carry on the development work and hope that that can be a platform for rebuilding some kind of political opening over the medium term. Staffan, I wonder what reflections you have on those kind of very, very difficult balancing acts that policymakers have to strike.
Yeah. Now you're inviting me to answer like a politician, which means not answering the question. But I think we are not very well placed as academics of the type I am, which studies sort of large and broad developments, to give very precise advice about specific contexts. But let me offer a couple of reflections. I think, first of all, we need to recognize that in the current period, what happened in Myanmar, or is happening with a military coup, is very rare these days. These are the things we used to see in the 60s and 70s. And now it's very rare. Autocratization doesn't happen that way generally. But it is perhaps a warning sign. It could be a warning sign of that there could be more of these sorts of developments to come if leaders who want to or object to democracy and want to run things a different way are emboldened by the current developments in the world. And therefore, on that basis, I think it would be a sound instinct that reactions should be very firm and very clear from the international community. I think we're seeing some of that, and I hope they keep firm. And in terms of, but I also would like to sort of turn things around when it comes to democracy protection and say we don't really know what works to stop autocratization or to turn it around, and what works in democracies that are on this sliding downhill slope, and what works with autocracies that are getting worse. So we're all for evidence-based policymaking, and that's also what the commissioner talked about. And I think two things that can be concrete are that, one, in some areas there are more knowledge than maybe we have pulled together, and pulling sort of groups of scholars together to distill what evidence is there, what works, I think it's one thing. But another thing we need to do, and we should be critical as an academic community also, that we haven't studied this enough. And if political leaders and international organizations can stimulate and promote more studies in areas where this evidence is needed, I think that's a good thing. And then we need to respond and be responsible.
Yeah, thank you, Staffan. That's a good note of kind of caution to finish on. We've already reached the end of our allotted time. I think the link will close us down very soon. So, well, I'll close the debate here. Short debate, but very interesting. And thanks to both Staffan and to Julia for joining us. We thought it would be useful to have this debate because, as the Commissioner was explaining, the Commission is in the midst of developing a number of quite important practical policy initiatives. So we thought it would be useful to bring to bear some of your very analytical work and try and use that to shed some light on these policy debates. We hope the debate has awoken interest in the audience. If people want to know more about these questions, I invite people to go to the new website that we've set up for the European Democracy Hub and join us for future debates when we'll carry on exploring these kinds of issues. So thank you to Staffan and Julia again, and to everyone for listening in.